the days after Renee Good was murdered in Minneapolis, and thousands took to the streets to protest the fascist brutality of ICE and the United States government, the organization Singing Resistance was born. Some of the songs they sang were passed down from generations of justice movements, and others were written for the moment they found themselves in. Even the new songs were inspired by old movements. Annie Schlafer, who wrote "It's Okay to Change Your Mind," says that she was inspired by the Serbian resistance movement Otpor, which opposed the dictatorship in Serbia in the late 1990s. Otpor is the Serbian word for resistance. The movement was rooted in nonviolent organizing, and their story is one example among many of how people have resisted oppression throughout history. Even as members of Otpor were arrested, beaten, and harassed by police, they kept reaching out to police officers and soldiers. They visited homes and workplaces with a simple message: you might not join us today, but you can tomorrow. 2 years later, when the military was ordered to use lethal force against protesters, many refused their orders, some even turning on other officers who had not yet defected. You might not join us today, but you can join us tomorrow. Oh, what a message. Imagine saying that to someone who had arrested you. Imagine saying that to someone who had beaten your friends. Imagine believing day after day that the person standing across from you was not the finished version of themselves. I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure that I could do it. But it makes me ask a question that's at the heart of every justice movement. How do we get people to change their minds? I think we tell ourselves a story about how people change. We imagine that someone hears the perfect argument. They read the perfect article. Someone presents the perfect statistic, and suddenly everything clicks into place. We imagine that if we could just find the right words, the right evidence, the right headline, the right study, the right way of explaining ourselves, another person's worldview would shift. If that were true, social media would have solved politics by now. But that isn't how most of us have changed. Think about the moments when your own worldview shifted. Maybe it was because you met someone whose life didn't fit the stereotypes you'd been taught. Maybe someone trusted you enough to tell you their story. Maybe you found yourself in a community that asked different questions than the ones that raised you. For most of us, the deepest changes don't happen all at once. They happen slowly, almost imperceptibly. A relationship complicates a certainty we once had. We begin to notice a contradiction we can no longer ignore. What once felt obvious begins to feel incomplete. We don't wake up one morning as entirely different people. We become different through hundreds of small moments that slowly reshape the way we understand ourselves and the world around us. Social psychologists have spent decades studying why people hold on to deeply rooted beliefs, and one of their recurring observations is that our opinions are often connected to something much larger than the opinions themselves. They become part of our identities, bound up with our families, our commitments, our communities, our histories, our sense of belonging. Changing your mind can feel less like reconsidering a position and more like risking the loss of the people who taught you to hold it in the first place. And that helps explain why relationships matter so much. People are more willing to transform when they believe they will still belong. Many of us in this room know what it's like to be people trying to move the conversation. We know what it feels like to be discouraged, to wonder whether anyone is listening, to ask ourselves whether anything is really changing. History has a way of reminding every generation that our imaginations are always unfinished. There were people who believed ending segregation was asking too much. People who believed same-sex marriage was politically impossible. There are conversations happening today that will seem equally obvious to future generations. And there are injustices that we have not yet learned to recognize. Part of our spiritual discipline as Unitarian Universalists is remaining open to that possibility. Not because every new idea is good, but because none of us has reached the end of our own becoming. And for those of us who find ourselves already further radicalized, there is another temptation waiting for us. Movements can become so accustomed to disappointment that we begin to assume anyone who hasn't caught up yet simply doesn't care. We forget that our own political imaginations were shaped by teachers, organizers, books, communities, friendships, and countless conversations. We forget that somewhere, someone made room for us to grow. Organizing isn't the art of finding people who already agree with you. It's the art of helping people become who they are capable of becoming. It's also the work of building enough power that those who refuse to change can no longer maintain unjust systems unchallenged. And to be clear, none of this means sacrificing your safety. It doesn't mean asking marginalized people to educate those who are harming them. It doesn't mean abandoning accountability or pretending that every disagreement deserves endless patience. Every one of us needs to discern where those boundaries belong. But if we stop believing people can change, we stop building movements capable of changing the world. I think this is one of the gifts our faith has to offer. As Unitarian Universalists, our shared values of justice, transformation, and equity, all centered in love, call us into this work. Transformation reminds us that people and communities can become something they have never been before. Justice tells us where we are headed. Equity reminds us that the goal is not simply changing hearts, but changing the conditions that allow every person to flourish. We are called not only to imagine another world, but to help build it. One conversation, one relationship, one act of courage at a time. As Unitarian Universalists, we declare that every person has inherent worth and dignity. Sometimes we hear those words as a statement about who people already are. I also hear them as a statement about possibility. Every person possesses the capacity for growth. Every person is more than the sum of their worst choices, their worst fears, and their worst moments. Every person is capable of becoming more fully human. That conviction does not ask us to ignore harm or abandon accountability. Rather, it asks us to refuse the temptation to believe that any human being is beyond the possibility of transformation. Our Universalist ancestors made a breathtaking claim. At a time when much of Christianity was preoccupied with dividing humanity into the saved and the damned, they insisted that no one stood outside the reach of God's love. They didn't believe that love erased justice. They believed that love was what made justice meaningful, because its purpose was never simply punishment. Its purpose was restoration. Universal salvation has often been misunderstood as though it means that nothing matters, that harm has no consequences, or that repentance is unnecessary. But that has never been the heart of the tradition. There's a story I love to tell about the founder of Universalism, Hosea Ballou, and he's having a conversation with a Protestant colleague. And this colleague says, if I were a Universalist, I could hit you over the head and steal your horse and run off, and I'd still go to heaven. And you know what Hosea says back? He says, if you were a Universalist, the thought would never have occurred to you. Universalism takes transformation seriously enough to believe that no one is beyond it. It refuses to believe that anyone is permanently frozen in the worst chapter of their story. Salvation isn't a reward for having always been right. It's the promise that love never ceases to call us toward becoming more fully who we are capable of being. You might not join us today, but you can join us tomorrow. I keep returning to that sentence because it embodies that same theology. Imagine saying those words for 2 years. Imagine believing them enough to keep knocking on doors, even after arrests and beatings. Imagine trusting that people are capable of surprising you, capable of disappointing the systems that taught them who to fear and what to obey, capable of discovering a courage they didn't know they possessed when the moment finally came to choose. Our world desperately needs more people willing to resist injustice. It also desperately needs people who have not given up on the possibility that hearts can change. Every justice movement in history has depended on ordinary people becoming capable of something they were not capable of before. Our faith asks us to believe that this work of transformation is never finished, not in our neighbors, not in our institutions, and certainly not in ourselves. This doesn't mean every conversation you have will change someone's mind. Most won't. It doesn't mean every invitation will be accepted. Most will be ignored. It doesn't mean that every movement will succeed as quickly as we hope, or that justice will arrive without sacrifice. The people of Otpor knew that. The people marching against ICE know that. Every generation that has struggled for freedom has known that. And still, they keep extending the invitation. Because movements are built not only on the courage to resist what is, but on the hope that people can become part of what might yet be. That hope is not naive. It's disciplined. It's practiced. It's renewed every time we choose to have one more conversation, to knock on one more door, welcome one more person into the work, and remain open to being changed ourselves. Because none of us has arrived. None of us have finished learning what justice requires or what love makes possible. We are still growing into the people our values call us to become. We are still building the beloved community our ancestors imagined. We are still discovering new ways to embody justice, equity, and transformation in a changing world. So may we have the courage to change our minds when truth asks it of us. May we have the patience to accompany others as they grow into deeper understanding. May we have the wisdom to know when to keep inviting and when to protect ourselves. And may we never lose faith that another human being and another world is capable of becoming something more than it is today. It's okay to change your minds, and you can join us. Join us here anytime. May it be so.